Every ending is a beautiful neon requiem, a glowing tribute to the path we've walked and the lessons learned. Join us as we close this chapter and prepare for the next big cinematic reveal. Click subscribe now and witness the beauty of a perfect resolution.
They didn't know that the man they called beneath us would spend the next 17 years proving them wrong in every way that mattered. The last time I saw my father, Richard Holloway, senior partner at Holloway & Associates, the most respected estate law firm in Connecticut, he stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom and told me I was throwing away everything 3 generations of Holloways had built. For a welder? A man who smelled like metal shavings and worked with his hands. A man whose father drove a delivery truck and whose mother cleaned houses on Thursdays. I was 22 years old. I had a ring on my finger and a future my parents hadn't designed, and that was the unforgivable crime. My mother didn't say anything that day. She just stood behind my father with her arms crossed and her jaw set, the same way she looked at opposing counsel in the courtroom. Like I was a problem to be dismissed, not a daughter to be loved. I carried 2 suitcases out to Marcus's truck. He didn't say a word about what had just happened. He just took the heavier one from my hand, put it in the bed of the truck, and held the passenger door open for me. That was Marcus. That was always Marcus. We had met 18 months earlier at a 4th of July cookout at my friend Dana's house in New Haven. I had just finished my first year at Yale Law, following the path my parents had paved since I was old enough to hold a pencil. Marcus was there because Dana's older brother Jake was his closest friend from high school. He was 25, already running his own small welding operation, subcontracting for construction projects across southern Connecticut and western Massachusetts. He was not what I expected to feel anything about, but he was funny in a way that didn't try too hard. He asked me questions and actually listened to the answers. He knew nothing about estate law, and everything about how things were built. Bridges, frameworks, the bones of buildings people walked through every day, without thinking about what held them up. There was something about the way he talked about his work that I hadn't heard in any of the Yale seminar rooms I'd been sitting in for a year. He talked about it like it mattered. Like making something solid and real and lasting was a form of dignity. We dated quietly for 8 months before I told my parents. I knew what was coming. I just didn't know how cold it would actually feel when it arrived. My mother called him unsuitable. My father used the word mismatch 4 times in one conversation. Like repetition would make it land harder. They weren't cruel in the loud way. They were cruel in the precise, lawyerly way, dismantling every reason I had with counter-arguments, precedents, projections. My father said that a man without a degree would hold me back, that the partners at any firm I wanted to join would look at my personal life and make judgments, that Marcus's world and my world were simply not compatible. I told them I disagreed. They told me that if I married him, they would not be attending the wedding, would not be available for financial support of any kind, and would need some time to reassess our relationship going forward. That was the language they used. Reassess our relationship going forward, like I was a client who had made a poor investment decision. I finished my 2nd year of law school on my own. Marcus worked 6 days a week. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport that had drafty windows and a radiator that banged all winter, and a landlord named Mr. Turner, Petrosian, who left tomatoes from his garden outside our door in September. It was the happiest I had ever been. We got married the following June in a state park outside the city. Dana was my maid of honor. Jake was Marcus's best man. There were 43 people there, every single one of them from Marcus's side or my own small circle of friends. No one from my family. Not one. My mother did not call. My father sent a card with no personal note, just his signature, like he was closing a file. I graduated from Yale Law the following spring. Marcus's entire family drove up for the ceremony. His mother Carol hugged me for a long time and cried in a way my own mother never had. His father Don shook my hand and said he was proud of me, and I had to look away because something about hearing that from him undid me completely. I passed the bar on my first attempt. I joined a mid-sized firm in Hartford doing civil litigation. It was not glamorous. It was long hours and difficult clients, and more document review than any law school class had prepared me for. But I was good at it. I found that out in the first year. I was precise and calm under pressure, and I could read a room, skills I had apparently inherited from my parents, and was now using entirely against their vision for my life. Marcus's business grew. By the time our daughter Nora was born, 3 years into our marriage, 2 years into my career, he had 8 full-time employees and contracts that stretched into Rhode Island. He coached her little league team when she was 7. He taught her to change a tire when she was 12. He showed up to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every single thing that required a parent to be present. He was, without any contest, the most present and devoted father I had ever seen up close. Nora grew up knowing exactly who her grandparents on my side were. I didn't hide it from her or dress it up. I told her the truth in age-appropriate pieces as she got older. That my parents had made a choice, that it had hurt, and that we had built something real and good without them. She processed it the way children process hard things when they have stable ground beneath them. She asked questions. She got quiet for a day or two, and then she moved forward. She was Marcus's daughter in that way. We heard things through the grappling vine over the years. My mother had made partner at her firm, then left to start her own practice. My father had taken on a high-profile client, a hedge fund manager facing fraud charges, and the case had ended badly, publicly. The firm's reputation had taken damage. I read about it in the Connecticut Law Tribune and felt nothing in particular, which surprised me. Nora was 17 the first time my mother attempted contact. It came as a letter, not an email, not a text, a handwritten letter on her personal stationery, forwarded through my Aunt Patricia, who was my mother's younger sister, and the only family member who had maintained any quiet thread of connection with me over the years. The letter said that my mother had been thinking about choices she had made, that she was not in good health, that she wondered if there was any possibility of conversation. I read it twice. I set it on the kitchen table. Marcus came in from the garage, read it over my shoulder, poured himself a glass of water, and said, "What do you want to do?" That was the question. What did I want to do? I had spent 17 years building an answer to a question my parents had posed when they walked away. Every case I'd won, every morning I'd woken up next to the right person, every school pickup and family dinner, an ordinary Tuesday that had been genuinely good. All of it was the answer. I didn't need them to see it. I didn't need the validation, but I was also 39 years old and had learned enough about human beings, in law and in life, to understand that what do you want is never a simple question. I didn't write back immediately. I waited 3 weeks. Then I sent a letter of my own, short, measured, the product of 3 drafts, that said I was open to one conversation, that I had conditions, that I needed honesty, not performance. We met at a coffee shop in West Hartford on a Tuesday afternoon in November. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. She was 68. She had the same precise posture, the same careful clothes, but something around the edges of her had loosened, or maybe worn down. She was already seated when I arrived, and she watched me cross the room with an expression I had never seen on her before. Something uncertain, something almost afraid. She ordered tea. I ordered coffee. We sat across from each other in silence for a moment that felt much longer than it was. She said, "You look well." I said, "I am well." She asked about my work. I told her I had made partner at my firm 4 years ago. She nodded in a way that might have been pride, or might have been something more complicated than pride. I wasn't sure it mattered. Then she said what she had come to say. My father had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's 18 months earlier. The progression had been faster than his neurologist had initially projected. He was still functional, still living at home, but the long-term picture was uncertain and the costs were significant. Their savings had been hit harder than expected by the fallout from the hedge fund case. A malpractice suit that had been settled but at considerable personal cost. She wasn't asking for money, she said. She wanted me to know the situation. I looked at her for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. She was quiet for a beat. Then she said, "Because you deserve to know. And because I have spent a long time being wrong about things and not saying so." It was not an apology exactly. It was the closest thing to one she was capable of, I thought. My mother did not apologize. She acknowledged. She recalibrated. I drove home, thinking about what she hadn't said as much as what she had. She hadn't mentioned Marcus once during the entire conversation. She hadn't asked about Nora by name. Only your daughter. Like the name was a word she hadn't earned the right to use yet. That night, I told Marcus everything. He listened the way he always did. Completely. Without interruption. Without rushing toward an opinion. When I finished, he said, "How do you feel?" I said I didn't know yet. He said that was a fair answer. The harder conversation came 6 weeks later, when my mother called and asked if there was any possibility of meeting Nora. Nora was 17, nearly 18. She was not a child who needed to be protected from information or shielded from complexity. She was her father's daughter. Steady, direct, curious. When I sat down with her and explained the situation, she listened with her arms folded on the kitchen table and her eyes steady on mine. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom, does she actually feel bad? Or does she just feel bad about how things turned out for her?" I told her that was exactly the right question, and that I wasn't sure I had the answer yet. Nora thought about it for a day. Then she came to me and said she was willing to meet my mother once in a neutral place, with me present. That she wasn't committing to anything beyond that. That she reserved the right to walk away at any point if something felt wrong. She was 17 years old. She had arrived at a more sophisticated emotional framework than most adults I knew. We met my mother for lunch at a restaurant in Hartford in January. Marcus did not come. That was a separate frontier. And we all understood it without saying so. My mother arrived before us and stood up when Nora walked in, and I watched her face do something I hadn't seen in that coffee shop 2 months earlier. Something cracked open in it. She looked at Nora, this tall, calm, dark-eyed girl who had Marcus's steadiness and my precision. And she looked like someone confronting the cost of an old decision in the most concrete way possible. Nora shook her hand. She said, "It's nice to meet you." Polite, measured, not warm. The lunch lasted 90 minutes. My mother asked Nora questions about school, about what she wanted to study, about her interests. Nora answered them honestly and briefly. She did not perform warmth she didn't feel. She was not rude. She was exactly as present as she had decided to be, and not 1 degree more. In the car on the way home, Nora stared out the passenger window for a while. Then she said, "She spent the whole lunch trying to figure out how to get me to like her." I said yes, I had noticed that too. She said, "I don't think that's the same as actually being sorry." I told her she wasn't wrong. What happened next was something I hadn't anticipated. My mother began showing up, slowly, carefully, without pressure. Cards on birthdays, a text on Nora's graduation day which Nora read and set her phone down without responding to, which was her right. An email to me that was, for the first time, something close to direct. She wrote that she understood that trust was not owed, that it had to be built, and that she was prepared to do whatever rebuilding looked like, if I was willing to define it. I showed the email to Marcus. He read it and said, "That's a more self-aware sentence than I expected from her." I said I thought so too. We talked for a long time that night about what forgiveness actually meant, not the performance of it, not the version that required pretending the past hadn't happened, but the real version, the one that didn't carry the weight anymore. I wasn't there yet. I wasn't sure I would ever be entirely there. But I understood, sitting in my kitchen at 40 years old. That the anger I had carried for 17 years had already cost me something. Not as much as their rejection had cost me, but something. I wrote my mother back. I told her that a relationship, if there was going to be one, would be on terms that Marcus was part of. That his name would be spoken in any room we shared. That 17 years of his work, and his presence and his love for our daughter, was not a background detail. It was the main story. She wrote back within the hour. She said she understood. She said she understood. She said she owed him an apology she wasn't sure how to give, and she asked if I would tell her how. I told her she'd have to figure that part out herself. That was between her and Marcus. The conversation between them happened on a Saturday afternoon in March, in our living room. I was in the kitchen, close enough to hear, but not watching. Marcus had said he wanted to handle it in whatever way felt right in the moment. I trusted him. I had always trusted him. I don't know exactly what was said. I know it lasted 40 minutes. I know that when my mother left, she looked like she had done something hard and necessary. And I know that when I came back into the living room, Marcus was sitting on the couch, with his elbows on his knees, looking at the floor. And when he looked up at me, his eyes were wet. He said, "She told me she was wrong." I sat down next to him. He said, "I didn't think that was going to matter to me." But it did. We sat there together for a while without saying anything. The radiator didn't bang anymore. We'd lived in a different house for a decade. Outside the window, the yard was just starting to come back to life after winter. Nora came home from her friend's house an hour later, dropped her bag by the door, looked at both of us on the couch and said, "What happened? You both look like you cried." Marcus said, "We did, a little." She looked at him for a second with that steady, reading gaze she had inherited from both of us somehow. Then she said, "Good," and went upstairs to do her homework. I don't have a neat ending to offer. My mother is part of our lives now in a careful, measured way. My father, whose Parkinson's has progressed to the point where good days and hard days alternate in ways no one can predict, met Marcus for the first time 8 months ago. He shook Marcus's hand and said, "I hear you built something real." Marcus said yes. My father nodded and didn't say anything else, and I understood that was probably as close as he could get, and I decided to let it be enough. Nora left for college in September. She chose engineering. She wants to build things. She said to me, before she left, "I'm glad I met her. I'm not sure I'll ever feel like she's my grandmother. But I'm glad I know what happened." I told her that seemed like exactly the right place to land. There is a version of this story where I held the line forever and felt righteous about it. I understand that version. I have friends who have chosen it with their own families, and they are not wrong to have done so. What other people took from us over 17 years cannot be returned. The wedding my parents didn't attend, the early years they didn't witness, the first time Nora laughed, those are not recoverable. But I am a lawyer. I know what it costs to keep litigating a case that has already been decided. The case was decided a long time ago. Marcus proved it. Nora proved it. And somewhere along the way, without asking for anyone's validation, so did I. My father called me the wrong choice in the doorway of my childhood bedroom when I was 22 years old. I have thought about that a lot over the years. I have never, not once, believed him. There is something my father used to say in the courtroom, back when I was young enough to sit in the gallery and watch him work, that every outcome has a cause, and every cause has a beginning, and the job of a careful mind is to trace that line honestly, without flinching from where it leads. I have thought about that a lot over the years, because the same logic applies to lives. My parents made a choice when I was 22. They chose the image of who they believed I should be, over the reality of who I actually was. That choice had consequences, not as punishment, not as some cosmic settling of scores, but simply because choices always do. When you remove yourself from someone's life, you are also removing yourself from everything that life becomes. You don't get to opt back in selectively, at the moment it becomes convenient. The intervening years don't disappear because you've decided you're ready to acknowledge them. What my mother found when she came back was not the uncertain 22-year-old she had walked away from. She found a woman who had passed the bar on her own, made partner on her own, and raised a daughter who could sit across a table from a stranger, her own grandmother, and calmly, without cruelty, assess whether that person had earned anything more than polite acknowledgement. Nora didn't learn that from a textbook. She learned it from watching two people build something real under difficult conditions and refuse to pretend it was otherwise. That is what I want to say about Marcus because the story doesn't make sense without him. He was never what my parents feared. He was never a ceiling. He was, from the very beginning, someone who understood that dignity is not granted by a title or a degree. It is demonstrated, daily, in how you show up. He showed up for 17 years in ways that cannot be tallied in any currency my parents understood. And the thing about that kind of consistency is that it shapes the people around it. Nora is who she is because of it. I am who I am, in no small part because of it. I am not a person who believes that suffering is a teacher sent to improve us. But I do believe that what we do with hard circumstances reveals something true about our character, and that character built honestly, without shortcuts, becomes the most durable thing a person can possess. The intelligence to understand a situation clearly, the integrity to act in alignment with your own values even when it costs you, the endurance to keep moving forward when the people who should have had your back chose not to. Those three things, developed over time and under pressure, are not abstractions. They are the actual substance of a life. My parents had credentials. They had reputations. They had a vision of how things should look. What they did not have when it mattered most was the wisdom to know the difference between a family legacy and a family. That difference cost them 17 years. It cost my father the chance to know the man who became, without question, the best person in any room he entered. It cost my mother the years when Nora was small and curious, and would have loved her without conditions, the way children do before they learn that conditions exist. Those costs were not imposed by anyone. They were the natural result of a choice, tracing its line forward exactly as my father once told me all choices do. I traced my own line. I am glad of where it led.